So today I have the opportunity to sit down with Katie Hanna at the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. And we're very excited because, Katie, you'll be joining us here at the center very soon. So I'd like to talk to you about your new role with the center. And I'd also like to have an opportunity to share with everyone a little bit about your background and what you did at U.S. Safe Sport. What made you interested in joining our work at the center, and telling us a little bit about what you're going to be doing for us, which is super exciting. So with that, let's get started. Katie, tell us a little bit about your background, sort of how you came into this whole area to begin with.
Yeah, and thanks, Mary. I'm so excited to be joining the team. So, I've had the opportunity over the last 15 years to work on preventing sexual abuse. So certainly started out working directly with kids and families, providing direct services, hearing from those individuals who are directly impacted. And from there, I've worked at the national level, as well as creating systemic reforms and change at the policy level with new laws to make sure that we're ending abuse. Certainly over the last 5 years, I've worked at the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, had the opportunity to really build out first of its kind abuse prevention policies, training that's been reaching more than 3 million athletes, parents, coaches, and volunteers, and really building out that cultural shift and change to end abuse in sport.
Wow. So at what point in your sort of 15 years did you pivot into sport, and why? Sort of what was, because you ended up at the Center for Safe Sport, so there was a pivot that happened, but at what point, and sort of tell us a little bit about why.
Yeah. So when I was executive director of the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence, so that's the state's sexual assault coalition within the U.S., we focused on supporting all the rape crisis centers that were supporting survivors, focused on abuse prevention. And, there was a high profile case where a teenage girl was impacted by sexual violence. When we looked at the intersections of that case, at the center of it was sport. And so as we looked at the opportunities for creating lasting change through that work, we created partnerships and advocacy, making sure that the voices of survivors were central to that conversation, looking at system reforms that needed to take place. So through that particular case, recognizing that sport is that vehicle for change. Sport can create so many positive, lasting impacts in children's lives and in all of our lives, but knowing that it's also an opportunity to make sure that there's prevention. So it was through that individual case and the experiences that we were hearing from survivors in the state that we created lasting changes in laws. There was a new funding stream for rape crisis centers to ensure that they had the adequate resources so that they could create sustainable change and support survivors. But we also worked with high school athletics, looking at school reforms. And from there, I became really interested in thinking about how do we prevent perpetration? How do we build the skills and tools that kids need and that families need to prevent abuse from ever being perpetrated in the first place?
Yeah, and it's so important what you say about, the voice of survivors. I mean, it's critical, and oftentimes, we go to them as if they're a resource to be tapped over and over again, and they're reliving trauma. So it's so important that work is, when it's done, is done carefully, and also that something comes of it, like real change happens, so that, they give us, that incredibly important information, but they don't have to do it multiple times, right? And that's just so talk to us a little bit about how then, as you started at U.S. Center for Safe Sport, talk to us a little bit about your role and your work there.
Sure. So, I started at the U.S. Center for Safe Sport back in the end of 2017. And at that time, there were no consistent prevention policies, no centralized system across the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic movement where people could report in abuse. It was happening at an individual national governing body level. And so through the work that we've done over the last nearly 5 years, we've created those policies, those standards of consistency around training, minor athlete abuse prevention policies, auditing the national governing bodies, and making sure that there's policies in place to both prevent abuse and respond to it consistently. So, A lot of those important reforms have been shaped by the voices of affected individuals, of the athletes and the coaches that we hear from directly every day. And like you shared earlier, it's up to us to make those changes so that people are not re-traumatized by the processes, to hear their voices and to act on it to make lasting change.
That's right. And the role of, it's a continuum that goes between, prevention is made better through the voice of those who've been affected. So as you look at building stronger prevention systems, safeguarding systems, it needs to be informed by what ends up happening, despite efforts to the contrary, that feedback loop happens, so that we're constantly getting better. The Center for Safe Sport grew out of major cases of sexual abuse in the United States, did it not? So the Larry Nassar and gymnastics case. So it was born, the U.S. Center for Safe Sport was born in 2017, 2016?
2017, yes.
2017. So, and then grew tremendously very recently. Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Sure. So, certainly with so many courageous survivors coming forward to share abuse that they have experienced for decades within sport, that created the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. And so, we've been opened for 5 years. Certainly, when we opened our doors, I started in 2017 at the end of the year. I was the 9th hire. We now have more than 115 employees on our staff. And so it's just incredible the amount of growth that we've seen and the need. As you can imagine, the numbers have continued to go up and up. Every quarter, every year, starting out with just over 300 reports in the first year to 3,000 reports in 1 year alone. So knowing that people have a confidential, safe, centralized place to go to make those reports, not only for abuse that happened yesterday, but that was also perpetrated decades ago, that has made a critical change and impact on the work that we do on preventing sexual abuse within sport.
Wow. And just, for those watching this, independent safe sport entities are being looked at by many countries right now. And the US did it back in 2017. But it really addresses a couple of key gaps, which in the system, which is when something happens, to somebody, sexual abuse happens, or another form of a human rights violation, where do they go to report that's safe? And where do they go to report that's independent when it comes to, how do you sort through investigations and things like this? So, the need for entities that are truly independent to do this work is critical. I was just in Germany a couple of weeks ago talking to the parliamentarians who are saying, what can we do to ensure sport respects human rights? I said, you're considering setting up an independent safe sport entity in Germany. This is really important. And I hope that they go through with it. But there are other countries as well, I think, that are looking at setting up safe sport entities. And certainly, is the US the first one, or were there others before it?
So we're the first one that really contains that umbrella of prevention, audits, and investigations. So certainly there have been other programs that may provide prevention education, but certainly bringing all those things together that makes it unique. And you're right that the independence is critical to the success of safe sport programs. Athletes need to know and trust that when they make a report, it is independent from their sport governing body. And so that's something as other countries, certainly we've been in conversations with more than 15 countries around the globe that are exploring these programs. And it's just incredible to see the support of countries coming together around the globe to really talk about these issues and build on lessons learned and best practices of how we can create a global system of safe sport.
Right. So important that we, as we're setting these up, that there's peer-to-peer learning, right? So what can people in Australia or Germany or what have you, or sub-Saharan Africa, what can they learn from things that are being done by others? So let's pivot now you're joining us at the Center for Sport and Human Rights. What made you interested in us as an organization, but also this specific role? And talk a little bit about the role.
So, I mean, I was really excited and so glad to be joining the team at the Center for Sport and Human Rights. I actually learned about the center from a colleague in another country, as well as the work that was really focused on centering human rights within sport as it pertains to the United 2026 FIFA World Cup. And so what I'm really excited about is just the work that the center has been doing, just groundbreaking impact around the globe, connecting communities and countries, advocating for human rights so that it's embedded in sport. And so really happy to be joining this team.
Terrific. So tell us about what your new role will be, and what you're hoping to achieve. And just before we do that, yesterday was a very big day for United 2026 because the 16 cities were finally selected. So, and this role that you'll be leading for us will work with 4 of those cities. I mean, all of them at some level, but a deeper dive in 4 of these 16 cities. So maybe tell us a little bit about what your new role is and what you're hoping to achieve.
Yeah, so as the senior project manager, I'll be working with at least 4 of those host cities in United 2026 FIFA World Cup, and really looking forward to building out a strong North American team that promotes the rights of children at the FIFA World Cup. What's really exciting about it is, working with cities and countries to connect with each other. And so that peer learning, certainly creating those connections, developing and implementing best practices, city-specific plans, really looking at the needs of individual cities, and then developing resources and policies to support that implementation. And certainly while this is the first of its kind of embedding human rights in a mega sporting event, it's the opportunity to ensure that happens at all mega sporting events in the future. So certainly evaluating what's working, what does it look like in other cities and other countries in the future. But really the goal of this project is to ensure that child rights are protected, respected, and promoted during preparations to host the 2026 FIFA World Cup.
Right. And moving from, protection, right, this continuum of first things first, let's make sure we're addressing any potential harm that could happen. And there are known predictable risks to children as in communities that will be hosting the World Cup or in supply chains involved in the World Cup. So we know about that. But at a city level, there are very specific ones that we've tracked over time, looking at previous Olympic Games, previous World Cups, right? But then beyond that, as we look to address those risks, there's this wonderful opportunity for agency and voice of children, which, especially with everything we're talking about with, climate crisis and other things, they're receiving what we're leaving for them, right? And their voice and agency, they have a lot to say. So talk to me a little bit about what excites you about, that part of it as well, which is the potential for legacy in the cities that will be hosting the 2026 World Cup.
So, I'm really excited about, and especially centering the voices of children and youth in this process. Kids have a lot to say and we need to listen to them. And this United 2026 FIFA World Cup gives us the opportunity to center and to listen to the voices of children and their families and communities coming together and to make lasting change. And so, what's really unique about this is that United 2026 not only brings individual cities together in just one country, it's 3 countries that can come together and collaborate. And there's so much that we can learn from each other and connecting that not only for 2026, but really that lasting impact. In the next 4 years, policies, programs, implementation is going to be put into effect, but we want to ensure that it is sustainable for the future so that once the World Cup goes away in 2026, that what we've heard from kids, the voices of their needs are being addressed beyond 2026 and into the future, because those kids are our leaders in our communities of tomorrow, and they're going to be the ones continuing on with that legacy that we start now.
And what we saw with, and I'm old enough to remember when the last time the United States hosted a World Cup, back in 1994, there was sort of life before 94 and life after 94 in terms of everything that was possible for that particular sport, the sport of soccer. And then, of course, 1999 happened, big boost again. But now we have this opportunity with all of this development to again have this inflection point of this incredible event that's going to be happening to these three countries, and what opportunities that gives us. This is a World Cup where we're not going to be building big stadiums, so we get to focus on the social legacy. And what's so exciting is the voice and agency of children as part of that. So they're not just, let's protect them. That's table stakes. Have to do that, right? But then what we can do with the voices of kids and their agency and exercising their rights, just so exciting. Very, very exciting. So Katie Hanna, wonderful to catch up with you. We're so excited you'll be joining us on July 1st. And really excited to sit down and spend some time with you. And we can't wait for you to get started. Thanks so much, Katie.
Thanks so much, Mary. Looking forward to getting started.